Hi, I'm Aaron from Living Science Videos. In an earlier video of this series, we answered the question about when matter is considered to be alive. One of the characteristics that distinguish living from non-living matter is that all life is composed of cells. They are the most basic form of life, and they're the most basic component of life. We use the analogy that cells are like building blocks. In your studies of cells, and even on test questions, you will see analogies that compare cells and their parts to other systems. A system is a group of interrelated natural objects or forces that interact together as a whole. An analogy is a way of explaining something we don't understand by comparing its similarities to something we do understand. It's okay to use analogies in science to help you understand unfamiliar concepts, but it's also important to remember the things you compare have fundamental differences too. Here's a word on analogies from Elon Musk. He's an engineer, inventor, entrepreneur, CEO of SpaceX and Tesla Motors, and he was the real-life inspiration for Tony Stark in Iron Man. I think it's important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. The normal way we conduct our lives is reason by analogy. With analogy, we are doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing. With first principles, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and then reason up from there. Let's look at the common cell analogy comparing cells to building blocks. A cell is a fundamental unit of structure and function in all living things. In multicellular organisms, cells of the same type form tissues like bones and muscles in your own body. They're both made of a mass of cells. So, like building blocks that form a wall, the same cells together form tissues and other structures. That's a fine introduction to the concept. But as we zoom in, the analogy breaks down and we have to throw it out because just as important is how cells are not like building blocks. One important distinction is that not all living things are composed of multiple cells like you are, or that tree out back, or that bug that's crawling on your... Never mind. Another important distinction is that building blocks don't maintain their own internal conditions or have systems to maintain homeostasis the way living cells do. All cells come from other cells by dividing in two, and they're able to grow, reproduce, consume, or eat, get rid of waste, or react to their own environment on the small scale in the same way that multicellular organisms like you can do on the larger scale. Can a brick do any of those things? Do bricks grow or maintain their own internal conditions when faced with negative outside stimuli, such as something trying to consume it? Every animal has to ingest and digest living cells in order to survive. We don't do so well eating bricks. The cells even have systems to prevent unwanted chemicals from entering. Cells have a semi-permeable wrapper and lots of complicated stuff going on inside. Not so for a brick. The cells do provide structure, like a brick, but imagine a living house, with each brick being so small that you can't see it. But together, they make a living wall of tissue that you can see. And each of those bricks are alive and have their own systems to maintain themselves and to reproduce themselves as well. It's kind of like when army ants build a bridge out of themselves. But again, the tiny size of cells makes them very efficient at maintaining their internal conditions. Each cell can exchange gases, like when you breathe in oxygen or breathe out carbon dioxide. As a matter of fact, cells help you do that. Cells are so efficient at maintaining themselves that most life forms exist only as single cells. Single-celled microbes were the earliest forms of life on Earth and still the most abundant forms of life we have today. Why do you think it's so hard to wipe out pathogens like the bacteria that cause tetanus and strep throat? They're tough and highly adaptable little buggers. In fact, some bacteria have even adapted beyond the ability of modern antibiotics to kill them. The largest single cell of bacteria can be seen with the naked eye. It's called Theomargarita namibiensis. It gets its name from the country of Namibia, and it grows in the ocean off the continental shelf of Africa. The largest it grows is 3/4 of a millimeter. Most cells range from 3 to 5 micrometers in length, so small that a line of 1,000 of them could fit across a pencil eraser. You may have heard of bacteria before, and you may have hosted a few harmful bacteria yourself, like if you've ever had an ear infection or a more serious disease like pneumonia. And your doctor may have prescribed antibiotics to help you get rid of the invaders. Not all diseases are caused by bacteria. Many of them are caused by viruses. Scientists don't classify viruses as officially alive, even though they can do a lot of the things that cells can do, because they can't reproduce on their own. One last thing about bacteria. Less than 1% cause diseases in humans. In fact, many are beneficial to humans. If you didn't have bacteria in your intestinal tract helping you digest your food, you would die. This is why some people eat yogurt with probiotics. They want to help replace digestive bacteria. And some people who have lost their digestive bacteria for reasons like having serious illness that required prolonged use of antibiotics need to have their bacteria replaced. And new advances in medical science have developed a gross but interesting process to replace them. They take intestinal feces containing digestive bacteria from a donor and implant it into the person who needs them. Your gastrointestinal tract is teeming with single-celled bacteria. It hosts trillions of microorganisms and is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. Microorganisms live in other parts of your body too, and on your body. Do you have bad breath? Well, you wouldn't really know, would you? Does the person next to you have bad breath? It may just be the bacteria living in their mouth. In fact, bacteria and single-celled fungi may amount to 6 pounds of your body weight and outnumber your own body cells 10 to 1 because bacteria are much smaller and lighter than your own cells. All life on Earth is classified in one of 3 domains. Although bacteria make up the largest and most diverse group of unicellular organisms, they're not the only one-celled organisms. Archaea is another whole domain on the tree of life, which are exclusively single-celled. The third domain are eukaryotes. That group is divided into several kingdoms, and some of them are one-celled too. There are one-celled algae and fungi and even one-celled plants. There are single-celled protists who act a lot like animals. Contrary to popular belief, however, there is no such thing as a single-celled animal. Animals are multicellular by definition. There are even organisms called slime molds that are single-celled and multicelled both at the same time, whenever it feels like it. One of these might travel as a sort of multicellular slug called a plasmoidium, but then when it eats, it dissolves into thousands of independent individual amoebas. Then it reassembles into a plasmodium slugworm again and moves on as a communal entity. Bacteria and archaea are the most abundant and diverse groups of life on Earth. They inhabit all of Earth's ecosystems, even where most other living things would have problems, like in the intestinal tracts of animals and in rocks deep underground. There are approximately 50 million bacterial organisms in a single gram of typical surface soil. And the global bacterial biomass exceeds that of all plants and animals and accounts for 1/2 of the mass of all living things on Earth. Let's have a look at a few of these extremophiles. The word sounds exactly like what it means. Extreme for extreme living conditions, and philia meaning that's the way they like it. Most of the hardcore extremophiles are archaea, and they used to be classified as bacteria because they have very similar cell structure, but vastly different genetics. And here's an example of one of the extreme conditions they thrive in. Thermophiles. The archaea Pyrolobus fumari is even considered to be a hyperthermophile, as it lives in temperatures that would kill virtually anything else. The Latin means pyro, fire, lobus, pod, and fumari, chimney, which is appropriate because it was discovered in a hydrothermal vent deep in the Atlantic Ocean and the mid-Atlantic ridge. It lives in temperatures of 121 degrees Celsius. That's 21 degrees above the boiling point of water. So imagine a day when the weather forecast was a blistering 250 degrees Fahrenheit. There are bacteria that are thermophiles too. Thermus aquaticus, the Latin name translates as hot water dweller, and it was discovered in the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. The adaptations, or ways that archaea and bacteria adapt to high temperatures, are different perhaps, giving further clues that they are different domains. Both bacteria and archaea lack a separate membrane-bound nucleus. There are 2 main types of cell structures. Those that don't have a nucleus are classified as prokaryotes. The Latin is helpful to remember this. Pro means before. Karyon means kernel, which refers to the nucleus. put it together and you're talking about cells that evolved before the nucleus. So prokaryotes are cells in their most primitive form. They were the first type of cell, and the prokaryotes are Earth's most ancient organisms. The other type of organisms, from the kingdoms you're probably more familiar with, plants, animals, fungus, protists like amoebas, are all classified as eukaryotes and have a nucleus. We have the Latin root eu here instead of pro. Eu means true in Latin, so eukaryotes have a true nucleus. So think about every one of your cells, from your skin cells to your nerve cells, even your bone cells have a nucleus, because you're a eukaryote. That is, if you don't count the bacteria that you're harboring right now, whether beneficial, neutral, or harmful. They are prokaryotes. Save this in your hard drive, because we will be revisiting this concept later when we talk about your body's systems and classifications. There's a whole hidden world out there that you can't see, right under your nose, and maybe in your nose. And you're hosting unicellular guests right now, and you don't even notice them until something goes wrong.